My name is Claire Hadley. I'm 34 years old, and for most of my life, I genuinely believed that family was the one thing you could count on no matter what. I believed that the people who raised you, who ate at the same table with you, who knew the sound of your laugh before you even understood what laughing was, I believed those people were safe. I was wrong. But before I tell you this story, I want you to do something for me. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you loved, someone who was supposed to love you back, subscribe to Pet Witness because stories like this one deserve to be heard, and I promise you, by the time we get to the end, you'll understand why. I grew up in Millhaven, Georgia. It's a small town, the kind where everybody knows your car before they know your name. Population just under 6,000. One main road called Brewster Avenue that has a Dollar General, a barbecue place called Slocum's, and a pharmacy that's been owned by the same family since 1974. That's it. That's the whole center of the world if you're from Millhaven. My parents, Donna and Gerald Hadley, had a house on Creekside Road, a pale yellow ranch with a carport, and a cracked concrete driveway where the grass kept pushing through the seams, no matter how many times my dad sprayed it with weed killer. 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a kitchen that smelled like burnt coffee and dish soap from the moment you walked in the door every single morning. There were 4 of us kids. My older brother Dale, who's 39 now, my younger sister Renee, who's 30, and then my younger brother Kevin, who just turned 27. I was the second oldest, the quiet one. The one who got straight B's instead of straight A's, who worked part-time at the Sunoco on Route 9 during high school while Dale played varsity baseball and everyone cheered. The one who drove Renee to volleyball practice and Kevin to his orthodontist appointments because my parents both worked long hours and someone had to. That someone was always me. I don't say that with bitterness, not anymore. But I want you to understand the texture of my life in that house. I want you to understand my place in the hierarchy because it matters. It matters enormously to everything that comes later. My dad, Gerald, was the plant manager at a packaging facility outside of town. He made decent money, not great money, but enough. My mother, Donna, worked part-time at the Millhaven County School District office, doing administrative work. Together, they brought in somewhere around 78, maybe 80,000 a year. In Millhaven, that made you comfortable, not wealthy, comfortable. They had a routine. Dad home by 6:15, Mom would start dinner at 5. Dale would be out somewhere, usually. Kevin would be in his room playing video games. Renee would be on the phone, and I would be at the kitchen table, doing whatever needed doing, homework, folding laundry, sometimes just sitting there being the invisible background of a household that ran because I kept it running. I moved out when I was 22, got an apartment in Calhoun, about 40 minutes north. Nothing special. A 1 bedroom on the second floor of a complex called Ridgeview at $720 a month. I worked at a medical billing office, entry level, $12.50 an hour, which eventually became 16 after 2 years. I drove a 2009 Chevy Cobalt with a passenger window that wouldn't roll all the way down. I ate a lot of pasta. I called my mother every Sunday morning. That was my life. It was small and quiet and mine. And then, 4 months after I moved into that apartment, I adopted a dog. His name was Biscuit. I need to stop here for a moment because I know how that sounds. I know that when people hear someone say, "My dog changed my life," there's a version of that story that feels soft and uncomplicated, like a greeting card, and I understand if you're bracing yourself for something like that. This is not that kind of story. Biscuit was a 4-year-old beagle mix I found at the Whitfield County Animal Shelter on a Tuesday afternoon in October. He was in the second row of kennels, skinny, brown and white, and a little bit orange around the ears. He had this one torn ear slightly ragged at the tip, like he'd been in a scuffle early in his life, and it hadn't healed quite right. When I stopped in front of his kennel, he didn't bark at me. He didn't jump. He just looked at me with these deep amber eyes that were so calm and so steady that I felt something shift in my chest, something I hadn't even known was misaligned. I paid $65 in adoption fees. I bought him a blue collar and a bag of kibble and a secondhand dog bed from Goodwill. I drove him home with the windows cracked and his head hanging out the passenger side, ears flattened against the wind, and for the first time in years, my apartment felt like somewhere I actually wanted to come home to. Biscuit slept at the foot of my bed every single night. He had this habit when I was upset, when I was quiet in that particular way that wasn't peaceful but was heavy. He would crawl up from the foot of the bed and press his whole body against my side. Just wait, just warmth. Like he was saying, "I'm here. I know. You're not alone." He never barked unless there was a real reason. He was calm the way only a dog who'd been through something difficult could be calm. Like he'd decided somewhere along the way that peace was a choice he was going to make every single day. I loved that dog more than I can explain in a way that doesn't sound excessive. And he was with me for everything that happened next. The first sign that something was wrong in my family came about a year after I moved out. It was subtle, so subtle that I almost missed it. I had driven back to Millhaven for my mother's birthday, the last Saturday in November. It was cold for Georgia that year, one of those gray November weekends where the sky sits low and flat and the light never quite breaks through. I pulled into the cracked driveway on Creekside Road just after noon, and I noticed that Dale's truck was already there. A black F-150 he'd bought the year before. He'd gotten a job doing electrical contracting and was making good money, and he let everyone know it. Not loudly, just constantly. I came through the back door the way I always did. The kitchen smelled like the cake my mom was baking. Yellow cake with cream cheese frosting. The birthday cake she'd made every year since I could remember. There was a ceramic rooster on the counter that had been there my entire life. A calendar from the bank on the wall. The same dish towels with the strawberry pattern. And then I heard it. Not all of it. Just the tail end of a conversation happening in the living room. My mother's voice, low and careful, and Dale's voice, matter of fact in the way he got when he was talking about something he'd already decided. She's always been like that, I heard Dale say. You know how she gets. A pause. I'm just saying. My mother's voice quieter. It's not fair to keep comparing. I'm not comparing. I'm just stating facts. And then someone shifted on the couch, and I heard footsteps, and I walked into the kitchen and started setting my purse down on the counter. And my mother appeared in the doorway and smiled at me the way she sometimes smiled, too quickly, too wide, with her eyes arriving a second behind her mouth. You made it, she said. Happy birthday, Mom. I never asked what they were talking about. I probably should have. But in that house, in that family, the unspoken rule was that you did not pull on the threads. You left things where they fell. So I left it, but I didn't forget it. The next several months had a texture I can only describe now as slow erosion. Nothing catastrophic, nothing you could point to directly, just small things. A group chat message I wasn't included in about Thanksgiving plans, and then later told, "Oh, we figured you'd be busy." A conversation at Christmas where Dale made a joke about how I'd never really figured out what I wanted to do with my life. And everyone laughed and then looked away when I didn't. Renee posting a photo on Facebook of a sister's trip to Savannah that I hadn't been invited on. When I texted her about it, she said, "It was last minute. Sorry, Claire." She'd planned it 3 weeks in advance. I saw the tagged restaurant reservations in the photos. None of it was a knife. It was more like, you know how sometimes water gets into the foundation of a house? It doesn't announce itself, it just seeps. And over time, the structure weakens in ways that aren't visible until the moment everything shifts at once. I told myself I was being sensitive. That's what my family had always told me, going back to childhood. You're too sensitive, Claire. You take everything personally. Why do you always have to make things heavy? So I kept my mouth shut. I went back to my apartment. I walked Biscuit through the neighborhood at dusk, watching him sniff every fire hydrant and leaf pile with the dedication of a professional, and I told myself everything was fine. Everything was not fine. I need to tell you about my grandmother's house. My grandmother on my father's side, Eunice Hadley, died in March of the year I turned 31. She was 83. She'd lived in the same house on Orchard Mill Road since 1961, a 3-bedroom craftsman with a wide front porch and a pecan tree in the backyard that was older than anyone in our family. She made the best sweet tea in Whitfield County, and she used to save empty coffee cans and fill them with dirt and grow tomatoes on her back steps. She was one of the realest people I've ever known. Grandma Eunice and I were close in the particular way that happens sometimes between a grandparent and a grandchild who are both quiet observers in a loud family. She used to sit with me on that front porch when I was a kid and let me be quiet without trying to fill the silence. She'd hand me a glass of sweet tea, and we'd just sit there watching the pecan tree, and it was one of the most peaceful feelings I've ever experienced. When I was about 12, she gave me something, just quietly, not making a big deal of it, a small gold bracelet with a tiny pecan charm on it. She'd had it made at a jewelry shop in Dalton years before. She slid it onto my wrist and said, "You and me, we see things other people miss. That's worth something." I wore it for years. Even after the clasp broke, I kept it in the small ceramic dish on my nightstand. Every night when I took my jewelry off, I'd put it in that dish. Every morning when I put my jewelry on, I'd see it there. It was just part of the rhythm of my days. Grandma Eunice left a will. She had, to be honest, more than anyone expected, not a fortune, but the house on Orchard Mill Road, which had been appraised at around $212,000, a savings account with $47,000 in it, some furniture, some jewelry, a small collection of depression glass that she'd been adding to for 30 years. In her will, she left the house to be divided equally among her 4 grandchildren. Me, Dale, Renee, and Kevin, equal shares. The liquid assets would go to my father as her only child. That's what the will said. I know that's what it said, because I was there when the family attorney, a man named Robert Fitch, who worked out of an office on Brewster Avenue, read it out loud. I was sitting at a long table in a conference room with a water stain on the ceiling tile above my head and a box of tissues at the center of the table that nobody touched. It was 11 days after Grandma Eunice's funeral. I had driven up from Calhoun in the rain with Biscuit in the back seat and checked into the Comfort Inn on Route 9 because I hadn't been asked to stay at my parents' house. That struck me as odd. It was a Wednesday. There was no reason I couldn't have taken the couch. But when I'd mentioned coming up for the will reading, my mother had said very casually, "You might want to just get a room. It's easier." I didn't understand why until later. At that table in Robert Fitch's conference room, my father sat at the head, then Dale, then Renee, then Kevin, then me at the far end, with my coat still on because the room was cold and I couldn't seem to get warm. Robert Fitch read the will, 4 equal shares of the house, the savings to my father. It was all exactly as I said, and then my father cleared his throat. "There's been a discussion," he said. He didn't look at me. "Among the family, about how to handle the property." I looked around the table. Dale had his arms crossed. Renee was looking at the water stain on the ceiling. Kevin was picking at the edge of his thumbnail. My mother wasn't in the room. Spouses weren't included in the reading. "Okay," I said. "We think it makes more sense," my father continued, "to not divide the house, to keep it whole. Dale's in a position to buy out the other shares. He's offered a fair number." I looked at Dale. He looked back at me steadily. "What number?" I said. 15,000, Dale said. "Each." I ran the math in my head. 1/4 of 212,000 was 53,000. 15,000 was not 15,000. 15,000 was less than 30 cents on the dollar. "That's not," I started. "It's what he can do right now," my father said, "and it keeps the house in the family." "It keeps it with Dale," I said. "That's not the same thing." The room got very quiet. "We've talked about this," Dale said. His voice was completely level. That was the thing about Dale. He never raised his voice. He just got very flat, very even, like a stone skipping across still water. "You've always had a problem accepting how things work in this family." "I have a problem with math?" "Claire." My father's voice, a warning. "And I want you to understand something. I want you to understand the weight of that moment." I was sitting at the far end of a table in a cold room, wearing my coat, looking at the faces of my father and my brother and my siblings, and every single one of them had clearly already made this decision. Before that meeting, before I drove up in the rain, before I checked into the Comfort Inn alone because it was easier, they had made the decision. I was just there to be told. "I need time to think about this," I said. That was all I said. My voice was steady. I don't know how. Robert Fitch nodded and said something about the timeline, about how the estate needed to be settled within a certain period. My father nodded along, and then the meeting was over, and people stood and put on jackets, and I sat there for a moment longer than everyone else because I needed a second. Just 1 second. And then I drove back to the Comfort Inn in the rain and sat on the edge of the bed in room 114, and Biscuit put his head in my lap and looked up at me with those amber eyes, and I stared at the wall for a very long time. I didn't cry that night. I was past the part where crying came quickly. I was in the part where everything just feels cold. I called a separate attorney 3 days later, a woman named Patricia Good who practiced out of Dalton and specialized in estate disputes. She reviewed the will. She confirmed what I already knew. I was legally entitled to 1/4 of the fair market value of that house. She said the 15,000 offer was what she called predatory estate management, and that I had every right to refuse. When I told my family I was consulting an attorney, everything changed. It started with my mother calling me on a Friday morning. I was at work in the medical billing office, and I saw her name on my phone, and I stepped outside into the parking lot where it was cold and slightly windy, and there were 2 pigeons walking near the dumpster. "Claire," she said, and her voice had something in it I'd never quite heard before. Not anger, something tighter than anger. "I need you to think about what you're doing." "I'm consulting an attorney about my legal rights," I said. "That's all." "You're tearing this family apart." I stood there in that parking lot and I looked at those 2 pigeons walking in careful little circles and I said, "I haven't done anything, Mom." Dale is furious. Dale offered me $15,000 for something worth 53. He's family, Claire. That sentence has lived in my head ever since. He's family, as if that changed the math. As if that changed the fundamental reality of what had been proposed. "So am I said. She hung up. If you've ever had the experience of suddenly becoming the villain in your own family's story, you know what happened next. It's disorienting in a way that's very hard to explain. One day you're a daughter, a sister, a member of a family, and then, because you've said no, because you've simply said this isn't fair, you become the problem, the ungrateful one, the difficult one, the one who always had to make everything about herself. Within 2 weeks, I was removed from the family group chat. I found out because I tried to send a message and got an error. I sat there and stared at my phone in my apartment, and then I put it down on the coffee table very carefully, like it was something fragile, and I went and sat in the kitchen for a while. Biscuit followed me. He always followed me. Then came the Facebook post. My sister Renee posted something vague and devastating, the way only a certain kind of person knows how to do. She didn't use my name. She wrote something about people who prioritize money over family and betraying the memory of someone you loved for a payout. She tagged my father, who left a comment that just said amen. Kevin commented a heart emoji. 14 other people, cousins, family friends, people from Millhaven who had known me my whole life, left comments about loyalty and gratitude, and about how sad it was when families fell apart because of greed. My phone rang for 2 days straight, not with support, with lectures. My aunt on my father's side called to tell me I was breaking my father's heart. A cousin I'd grown up with texted me to say that Grandma Eunice would be so disappointed. A woman from my parents' church left me a voicemail, about forgiveness and letting go. I listened to that voicemail once, then I deleted it. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor with my back against the cabinet, and Biscuit came and sat directly in front of me, nose to nose, and he put one paw on my knee, just one paw, just there, just weight and warmth and steadiness. I took a breath. I called Patricia Good on Monday morning. What followed was several months of legal process that I don't want to make boring because honestly it was paperwork and waiting and phone calls and more waiting. But the core of it was this. Patricia filed a formal objection to the proposed distribution. We requested an independent appraisal of the property, which confirmed the value at $217,000. My quarter share was legally $54,250. Dale eventually offered $30,000. Patricia said no. My family said I was being vicious. My mother stopped taking my Sunday calls. My father sent me a letter, an actual handwritten letter, that said, in part, "I hope one day you realize what you've cost this family." He signed it, Gerald, not Dad. I taped that letter to the inside of my pantry door. I don't know why. I think I needed to see it every once in a while to remind myself that I wasn't imagining things, that what was happening was real. Meanwhile, I was still going to work every day, still paying $720 a month for my one bedroom, still walking Biscuit at 6 in the morning through the neighborhood while it was dark and the sidewalks were wet from the night before, and the streetlights made little halos in the mist. Those walks were the most peaceful part of my days during that period, just me and Biscuit in the quiet. walking. He would stop at the same spots every morning: the fire hydrant on Maple, the big oak on Ridgeway where a squirrel lived, the corner of 3rd and Vine where there was a bakery that opened at 5:30 and the smell of bread came through the door. He had his routine, and his routine had me, and that was enough some mornings. I was in therapy at that point, had been for about 6 months since before the Will situation blew up. My therapist was a woman named Dr. Sandra Webb, who worked out of an office above a State Farm agency on the main road in Calhoun. She had reading glasses she wore on a beaded chain and a small bamboo plant on her windowsill that somehow never died. I sat in her office one Thursday and told her about Gerald's letter, about being removed from the group chat, about Renee's Facebook post. I said it all flatly, factually, like I was reading from a report. Dr. Webb let me finish. Then she said, "Claire, I want to ask you something. When you imagine letting go of the legal claim, just imagining it, how does your body feel?" I thought about it. "Like I'm disappearing," I said. She nodded slowly. "And when you imagine holding your ground?" I thought about that too. "Scared," I said, "but like I'm still here." She wrote something in her notebook. "Being still here," she said quietly, "is not a small thing." I subscribe to Pet Witness because of stories exactly like this one. Stories where someone is still here when all the evidence said they shouldn't be. If you're still watching, if something in this is landing somewhere in you, hit that subscribe button. This is exactly the kind of story this channel exists for. The legal process concluded 14 months after I first contacted Patricia Good. The final settlement was $41,000, not the full 54, but 41. Dale paid it through gritted teeth, and I know this because Patricia told me he called her office twice to complain about my attitude. I signed the paperwork on a Tuesday in April in Patricia's office with her bamboo pattern notepads and the view out the window of a parking lot and a CVS across the street. I drove home, made coffee, sat at my kitchen table with Biscuit at my feet. $41,000 was more money than I had ever had in my life. I didn't celebrate. I was too tired to celebrate. I sat there and drank my coffee and listened to the radiator make its clicking sounds, and I thought about what came next. What came next was this. I quit the medical billing job. I'd been there 7 years. The leaving was unremarkable. A card signed by the office, a small supermarket cake. My manager, Linda, hugged me and said, "You deserve good things, Claire." I believed her, which was new. I moved to a small town called Hartwell, Georgia, about 40 miles from Calhoun, near Lake Hartwell. I'd driven through it once on a trip, and something about it had stayed with me. The old brick buildings on the main street, the lake visible from almost everywhere, the way people waved at you from their porches without knowing who you were. It felt like a place where you could start without anyone knowing the version of you that came before. I rented a small house, not an apartment, an actual small house on Lakeview Drive with a fenced backyard, $1,200 a month. It was more than I'd ever paid for housing. It was also the first place I'd ever lived where Biscuit could go outside without being on a leash. And watching him step into that backyard for the first time, watching him sniff the fence line and then turn and look at me with that expression he had, that bright-eyed, ears-up expression, I stood in the doorway and felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Light, just a little bit of it, but real. I got a job as an office manager for a small medical practice in Hartwell, Dr. Ellsworth's family practice on Maple Street. Better pay than billing. I was making just over $50,000 by my second year. I made a friend named Joanne who worked the front desk and who brought homemade banana bread every Friday and who never once asked why I didn't talk about my family. She just accepted the shape of my life as it was, which is rarer than it sounds. I went to therapy every other week with Dr. Webb still, even though she was now a longer drive. Some things are worth the drive. And Biscuit thrived. He got a little gray around his muzzle, the way beagles do when they get older, but his eyes stayed that same deep amber. He had his spots in the new house, his bed by the back door, his morning walk to the lake, which was 4 blocks away, where he would stand at the edge of the water and stare at it with the intensity of someone who believed something important was just beneath the surface. I don't know what he was looking for. Maybe nothing. Maybe everything just seemed worth looking at to him. I started to feel like myself again, slowly. The way feeling like yourself returns, not all at once, but in small increments. A morning where the coffee tastes good, a weekend where you don't think about them, a moment where you laugh at something and then realize you just laughed and it wasn't performed and it wasn't for anyone. I found the bracelet from Grandma Eunice on a Tuesday evening while I was unpacking a box I'd moved but never fully opened. The clasp was still broken, the pecan charm was still there. I held it in my palm for a long time. Then I went to a jewelry shop in Hartwell, a small one on Commerce Street, run by an older man named Mr. Tatum who did repairs, and I had the clasp fixed, $7. I put the bracelet on my wrist and wore it home. I started wearing it every day after that. For about 2.5 years, that was my life. Small and mine and getting better. I had Biscuit and Joanne and Dr. Webb and the lake and the bracelet on my wrist and the job on Maple Street and the house with the fenced backyard. I had enough. I didn't hear much from my family, a few texts over holidays, perfunctory, without warmth. My mother tried once, called me on a Sunday, the second Christmas I was in Hartwell. We talked for 11 minutes. It was polite and entirely hollow, like talking to someone who was performing the idea of a mother without actually doing the work of one. I told her I was doing well. She said she was glad to hear it. She didn't ask about Biscuit. I started dating someone. His name was Marcus. He worked for the Lake Hartwell State Park System as a resource manager. He was 37, quiet, funny in a dry way, and he loved Biscuit immediately, which I considered non-negotiable. On their first meeting, Marcus sat on my kitchen floor without being asked and let Biscuit sniff his hands for a full 3 minutes before he made any move to pet him. Just waited, just let the dog make the call. I watched that and thought, oh, this one is a good person. We took it slow, slower than slow, but it was real. I was settled. I was healing. The ground beneath me felt solid for the first time in years. And then, on a Friday afternoon in September, my phone rang. Number I didn't recognize. Georgia area code. I almost didn't answer. I answered. Is this Claire Hadley? A woman's voice. Professional. A little careful. Yes. My name is Anne Pettigrew. I'm a paralegal with the firm of Carver, Besh, and Lowe in Dalton. I'm trying to reach you regarding the estate of Eunice Hadley. I stood very still. That was settled 2 years ago, I said. Yes, ma'am, I'm aware. But there's been a development in a related matter, and your name came up. I was wondering if you'd be willing to meet with one of our attorneys. Pause. What kind of development? I'd prefer to let Mr. Carver explain in person, if that's all right. I looked at Biscuit, who was lying on his bed by the back door, watching me the way he always watched me when he sensed something had shifted. Okay, I said. When? I drove to Dalton the following Wednesday. The office of Carver, Besh, and Lowe was on 2nd Avenue, the third floor of an older building with a slow elevator and dark wood paneling in the hallway. The kind of office that had been there a long time and wasn't trying to look like it hadn't. David Carver was in his late 50s. Gray hair, reading glasses, the careful manner of someone who had learned to deliver difficult information without embellishment. He offered me coffee. I took it, even though I knew I probably wouldn't drink it. And then he sat across from me and folded his hands on the desk. Ms. Hadley, he said, I want to be careful about how I explain this, because there are parts of it that are still developing. But there are some things you need to know, he paused. Are you aware that your grandmother Eunice had a separate account that was not included in the estate documents presented at the reading? The coffee cup was warm in my hands. No, I said, I'm not. David Carver nodded slowly. He opened a file folder and turned it so I could see the pages. In 2019, approximately 8 months before her death, your grandmother opened a separate savings account at a credit union in Chatsworth. The balance at the time of her death was approximately $89,000. I looked at the numbers on the page. Where did that money come from? I asked. It appears to have been transferred from her primary account in a series of withdrawals over about 18 months, small enough amounts, spaced out enough that they didn't trigger scrutiny. He paused again. The kind of pause that means what comes next is hard. Ms. Hadley, we have reason to believe those transfers were made under the guidance of another party, someone who assisted your grandmother in moving those funds and who then became the designated beneficiary on that account. The room was very quiet. The air conditioner hummed. Who? I said. My voice was flat. I already knew what kind of answer was coming. The way you know sometimes before you know. The way the body processes truth faster than the brain. Your brother, David Carver said. Dale Hadley. I sat with that for a moment. Just sat with it. $89,000. Hidden. A separate account. opened 8 months before Grandma Eunice died, when she was beginning to have memory issues. I knew that. I'd seen it at family gatherings. She'd repeat herself. She'd lose the thread of conversations. She'd look at you sometimes with a kind of gentle blankness that was heartbreaking. Dale had known that. Dale had been around. Dale had been the one taking her to doctor's appointments in that last year. Everyone said so. Everyone said how good Dale was, how devoted, how he was really stepping up. He'd been stepping up all right. How was this discovered? I asked. A teller at the credit union had concerns that were documented internally at the time but not acted on. After your grandmother's death, she, the teller, filed a report with the Georgia Department of Banking and Finance. It's taken this long to build a case, but we were contacted because your grandmother had separately mentioned in writing that she wanted, he paused, sorted through the file, found a page, that she wanted Claire to know the truth someday. He slid the page across the desk. It was a single handwritten page, the handwriting shaky but legible, the way Grandma Eunice's handwriting had become in her last couple of years. The date at the top was January of the year she died. February, she was gone. It said, I am not sure what I am signing sometimes. Dale brings me papers. He says it's for the house, for taxes, for the estate. I don't always understand. I asked him once about Claire, and he said she was taken care of. I don't think that is true. Claire sees things other people miss. I want someone to tell her I love her. I want someone to make sure she knows. Eunice Hadley. I stopped breathing for a moment, and then I very carefully set the page down, and I pressed my fingertip to the bracelet on my wrist, the one with the pecan charm, the one she'd put on me when I was 12, and I held it there. If you're watching this right now, and you've lost someone, and you still feel their absence like a presence, you know what that moment was. You know exactly. It took everything I had not to come apart right there in that office. Subscribe to Pet Witness. I mean this from the bottom of my heart. If you've ever had a moment where the truth finally showed up and it was bigger and more devastating and more vindicating than anything you'd imagined, subscribe. Share this. Because this is the kind of story that needs witnesses. David Carver gave me time. He didn't rush me. He refilled my coffee without asking. And then, when I was ready, he explained the next steps. The Georgia Department of Banking and Finance had been investigating. There was now a civil case being built around financial exploitation of an elder, which is a specific category of fraud in Georgia with real teeth to it. There was also the question of whether the original will reading had been conducted accurately, given that a significant asset had been concealed from the estate proceedings. Patricia Good, my original estate attorney, was contacted. She agreed to co-counsel. The case was real, it was moving, and it was bigger than just Dale. That part came out over the next few weeks, in phone calls and follow-up meetings and documents I read on my kitchen table late at night with biscuit pressed against my side and a cup of tea going cold. My father, Gerald, had known about the account. Not from the beginning, David Carver's team believed, but he had learned of it and said nothing. Had, in fact, signed a document during the estate proceedings that represented all assets had been disclosed. Whether that made him legally liable was something the attorneys were still untangling. Renee had known too. Not about the money, exactly, but she had known that there was something extra that Dale had arranged and that it was handled. She'd been told not to ask questions. Kevin genuinely hadn't known. Kevin, my little brother who'd spent most of his life in the background of things like I had, who'd commented that heart emoji on Renee's Facebook post because he was following along and didn't know any better. Kevin called me one evening in October, and he was crying before he could even say hello. Claire, he said, I didn't know. I swear to God I didn't know. I know, Kevin, I said. I'm sorry, I know, I said. It's okay. It wasn't entirely okay, but Kevin wasn't the one I was angry at. Kevin was 24 when all of this started. Kevin had always done what he was told in that family, the same as I had, except his compliance had been rewarded and mine hadn't. The civil proceedings moved forward, and then, in March, the local paper in Millhaven published a brief item about an elder financial exploitation investigation. It didn't name Dale specifically, they couldn't at that stage. But it mentioned the Hadley estate, and it mentioned an ongoing investigation, and in a town of 6,000 people, that was enough. People knew, people talk. People who had left comments on Renee's Facebook post about greed and loyalty and betrayal were now sitting with their morning coffee and their phones and putting things together. My mother called me. It was a Sunday. Not our Sunday call. She'd stopped those years ago. But she called and I answered. She didn't say much. She said, I didn't know about the account. I believed her, actually. My mother was many things, but I didn't think she'd been in on it. She'd been compliant, willfully blind, maybe, but not in the room when the decisions were made. Okay, I said. Dale told us you were trying to take more than your share. He said you'd hired an aggressive attorney and that you were going to bleed the family. Mom, I know, she said, very quietly. He took $89,000 from Grandma Eunice, and then he offered me $15,000 for my legal share. Silence. I know, she said again, smaller this time. We stayed on the phone in silence for a while. Not comfortable silence, but something that at least acknowledged the space between us was real and had weight. The civil case settled out of court the following June. Dale paid back the $89,000. He paid additional damages and legal fees. A portion of those damages came to me and to Kevin as the two grandchildren who had been most directly impacted. I won't give you the exact number. What I'll tell you is that between the original estate settlement and what came from the civil proceedings, Grandma Eunice made sure I was taken care of after all, the way she'd wanted. There was also a referral made to the Whitfield County District Attorney for potential criminal charges related to elder financial exploitation. As of the last time I spoke with David Carver's office, that matter was still pending. The legal system moves at its own pace, and I have made my peace with that. Dale lost two major contracting contracts when word spread in Millhaven. The electrical work he'd built his reputation on, two clients dropped him immediately. His wife left him, not right away, but 6 months after the civil settlement, she took their two kids to her sister's house in Athens and filed for divorce. I didn't feel good about that part. I want to be honest, I didn't feel victorious the way I thought I might. I felt tired, sad, in a complicated way, because there are children involved and children don't choose their parents. There was no clean satisfaction in any of it. It was all just loss, accumulated and distributed and impossible to entirely assign. Renee issued a public apology on Facebook, long and tearful, the way Renee had always communicated, at high volume, publicly, with herself at the center of the narrative. She said she'd been manipulated by Dale, that she hadn't known the full extent of things. She asked for forgiveness from anyone I may have hurt. She did not call me directly. She did not call Kevin directly. She posted, as if the debt was owed to the internet and not to us. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say to a Facebook post that I couldn't say better by staying quiet. My father sent me a letter. This time he signed it Dad. He wrote that he was ashamed of what had happened, that he hadn't understood what Dale had done until it was too late, that he had been wrong to pressure me in the estate process, that he was sorry. The handwriting was shakier than I remembered. He's getting older. He's in his mid-60s now. He doesn't have many years left where things can be set right. I wrote back a short letter. I said I heard him. I said I needed time. I said I wasn't able to promise more than that, which was honest, which was more than I had been allowed to be for most of my life in that family. I still have the bracelet. It's on my wrist as I tell you this. The pecan charm, the fixed clasp, small and gold and warm from my skin. I look at it sometimes when I need to remember that someone at some point looked at me and said, "You see things other people miss. That's worth something." Grandma Eunice was right. I see things other people miss. I saw that something was wrong at that table in Robert Fitch's conference room. I saw it in the parking lot when my mother called. I saw it in the silence where family should have been. I didn't always know what I was seeing, but I kept my eyes open. And Biscuit saw it too. I need to tell you something about the night I came home from David Carver's office. The night I found out about the hidden account, the letter from Grandma Eunice. I drove home from Dalton in the early evening. The sun was low and orange and hitting the lake at that angle where the water looks like it's on fire. I came into my house and I put my bag down and I stood in the kitchen and I didn't know what to do with my body. I didn't know where to put everything I was feeling. And Biscuit came to me. He got up from his bed by the back door and he walked across the kitchen and he pressed his whole body against my legs and looked up at me. Just that. And I sat down on the kitchen floor right there and I put my arms around him and I cried. For the first time since all of this began, I cried properly, not quietly, not carefully. I just cried with my face buried in the soft fur of his neck, and he stood there and let me. He didn't fidget, he didn't pull away, he just stayed, warm and steady and certain, the way he had always been. The way he'd been since that Tuesday in October at the Whitfield County Animal Shelter when he'd looked at me with those amber eyes and I'd felt something shift. He knew, is all I can tell you. Dogs know, not the details, not the legal case or the hidden account or the letter in Grandma Eunice's shaking handwriting, but the underneath of things, the truth underneath. He'd always known when I was carrying something too heavy, and he'd always shown up for it. He showed up for all of it. He's 12 years old now. His muzzle is almost completely gray. He walks slower than he used to on our morning trips to the lake, but he still goes. He still stands at the edge of the water and stares at whatever is just beneath the surface. And I still stand next to him and watch and don't try to interpret it. Some things don't need interpretation, some things just need to be witnessed. Marcus is still in my life, more than still. He proposed last spring on the dock at the lake at the end of one of our morning walks with Biscuit. It was raining slightly, that fine, soft rain that barely counts as rain, and Biscuit was investigating a piece of driftwood near the edge of the dock. And Marcus got down on one knee with a ring he'd chosen carefully and said, "I know it's raining. I wanted it to be on the water anyway." I looked at the bracelet on my wrist. The pecan charm. I said yes. I am still in therapy. Still going to Dr. Webb every other week, though we talk about different things now. Quieter things, growth things. The kind of work you do when the crisis is over and you're figuring out who you are in the space that's left behind. She asked me once what I'd learned from everything that happened, not what I'd gained, what I'd learned. I thought about it for a while. I learned, I said eventually, that being dismissed doesn't make you wrong. She wrote that down. And I learned, I said, that sometimes the ones who don't speak, the ones who just stay with you, they're the realest witnesses you get. I was thinking of Biscuit when I said it. She probably knew that. My name is Claire Hadley. I'm 34 years old. I live in Hartwell, Georgia, with a man who kneels in the rain and a 12-year-old beagle with a torn ear who taught me more about loyalty than any human being ever has. My family betrayed me. They thought I was alone. They thought I had no one. They didn't count on Biscuit. They didn't count on Grandma Eunice's letter. They didn't count on the fact that I see things other people miss. And they definitely didn't count on the truth eventually finding its way up from underneath, the way water always does, the way it always has, patient and certain and impossible to stop forever. I'm at peace now, not because everything is resolved, some of it never will be, but because I know who I am. I know what I stood for. I know that when I sat at the far end of that conference room table in my coat, in the cold, I told the truth. And I kept telling it, even when no one wanted to hear it, even when it cost me everything that winter. It didn't cost me Biscuit, it didn't cost me myself, and in the end, that was enough. More than enough. If this story meant something to you, if you've ever been the one at the end of the table, the one who was dismissed and outvoted and told they were too sensitive, leave a comment below. Tell me about it. Tell me what you held on to, because that matters. Subscribe to Pet Witness. We tell stories here that deserve to be heard, stories of loyalty and truth and the quiet, steady love of animals who don't ask for explanations. They just show up, they just stay, like Biscuit, every single time.